Hello, my name is James Arroyo, and this is Chapter 2, Groups as Systems. Groups work in a variety of complex ways as if it were a system. Let's break down what systems are and some of the elements of these systems and how they work. First, we start with what is a system. A system is a set of interconnected parts working together to form a whole in the context of a changing environment. So, let's break this down a little bit. First, a set of interconnected parts working together to form a whole. So, there are multiple people working together in this small group to form a whole, a actual group which has a particular goal. So then keeping in mind that this is in the context of a changing environment. Let's say, for example, that we have a study group and then all of a sudden COVID happens. I wonder what would happen in the changing environment outside of our group. It affects our group, and we have to be able to adapt to these situations. Then we have, so this is composed of three big parts: an input, a throughput, and an output. All systems have these, and all systems need input, be them instructions from a professor or people to add into an organization, or even, those things. Also, we have throughput. Throughput is the discussion and problem solving, the communication activities that are then used to transform this input into an output. For example, for a group project, the input may be the instructions from the professor as well as fellow students into this system. Then at that point, the throughput is discussion about these instructions and all of these things. And then the output would be a final project. Structuration theory plays into this. Structuration theory states that a system establishes structures for discussion and problem solving, which then enable this throughput, in the forms of norms, roles, and power distribution, which permit the system to not only function, to do what it does, but also to sustain itself. All systems will eventually and inevitably entropy without this sort of input. Let's think about this. Let's say that we work in a tech group, a group that is a business, a tech business. If there are no new people coming in, if there is no new technology going into this system, then everything will be outdated. As a result, no matter how much throughput we try to engage with with the input that is available to us, we will not be able to provide that solid output and will eventually entropy or break apart. All things in nature, entropy and groups and systems are one of those things. There are three elements to systems that we will be discussing today. First, an interconnectedness of parts. Second, an adaptability to a changing environment. And third, that size has a big influence on all systems. First, we start with an interconnectedness of parts. And just like a machine, a chain, due to this interconnectedness of parts, there are ripple effects or chain reactions across a system. A small part of a huge system can generate an enormous ripple effect. Keep in mind the entertainment industry back during writers' strikes, that due to one small part, the writers not doing their job, not develop contributing their throughput, it created a lot of negative effects across the system. In the same way, think of the energy industry. The energy industry is adding, slowly but surely, solar power. This is where it gets a little bit weird, because that sounds like it would be an amazing good thing. And for all intents and purposes, that absolutely is the case. However, what this is causing is something called a duck curve, where the demand for energy from other sources beyond solar power remains fairly consistent throughout the day, but around the evening, around the midday hours, energy is more used. At that point, solar power comes into play. But all of these other energy sources are still working. So demand for energy goes down during those days because the sun is up and these solar panels are taking in that energy. So some people are worried about right now, that if these since these machines that generate a lot of electricity via nuclear power or gas power, that these are not going to be cost effective anymore because they will be shutting down in the middle of the day. So, while there may be a lot of good things happening, we have to keep in mind the system and how there are ripple effects across the entire system. Also, along with this interconnectedness of parts comes synergy. Synergy, for all as is best defined as 1 + 1 = 3. That a group working together, when group members are highly motivated to achieve a common goal, then synergy is produced from relative, and the participants are are participating relatively equally. Then what happens is that the group can become more than the sum of their parts. Meaning that if person A, Steve and Susan and David all worked on their own, then they would not be able to develop as much output, as much output as if they all work together. But highly motivated to achieve a common goal and relatively equal participation are essential for this synergy to take place. Groups whose members have deep diversity have a greater potential to produce synergy as well. What deep diversity is it is a substantial variation among members in task-relevant skills, knowledge, abilities, beliefs, values, perspectives, and problem-solving strategies. Think back to culture. When people are diverse, it allows for a wide variety of perspectives and therefore a lot of different solutions to the same problems that we experience. This is where groups are at their best. However, when these things are not happening, when people are not committed to the common goal, or people are not participating equally, this can create something called negative synergy, when group members working together produce worse than expected results based on individual members' perceived skills and abilities. So in other words, if Dave and Susan and Steve all worked separately, they would be able to achieve more than if the group was fully was together. If you are sharing, if for example, a group is sharing ignorance, misinformation based off on a lack of knowledge, then no group genius is likely to emerge, no synergy is going to take place. So let's say that we have a group project or a group project. And we are working together very well. Then all of a sudden, Steve walks in, and Steve then blames other people for not being not putting in their effort, even though they have put in effort. He then decides to belittle people and overall distract from the common goal. Then that is where this negative synergy can take place. We also, along with this adaptability, along with this interconnectedness of parts, we also have an adaptability to a changing environment. Systems are never in a static state. And if there is no change, then they can eventually dissolve. But they're never in a static state. The environment is the context within which a system operates. So the things outside of our system, our group. And then equifinality is groups reaching a similar or identical goal in highly diverse ways. So a lot of systems can have this sort of equifinality where people, even though that many diverse people are coming up with different solutions, they can all come up with the same end result. So the process of adapting to change to achieve our goals involves quite a few parts. First, dynamic equilibrium, managing stability and change. Dynamic equilibrium, by managing both of these, the organization and the system is able to continue functioning. Because if it is too stable, that means that there is not a lot of adapting to the outside environment, because the outside environment is always changing. However, if it is too changing, then it can cause some serious challenges with the people inside not knowing what's going on. We also have to keep in mind dealing with difficult group members, which involves bad apple spoilage, boundary control, which is regulating input, communicating methods of boundary control and by erecting these boundary barriers, and then open and closed systems, setting effective boundaries. We'll jump right in. Next, we talk about dynamic equilibrium. As I said before, it's managing stability and change. Dynamic equilibrium is the range between stability and change that a system can change enough to promote growth and success without destroying the system with too much instability. So there is a range of acceptable behavior, and we should try to meet that range. Dynamic equilibrium is effective when it regulates the degree of change so that we are not changing too much. Either we can have very, very big changes, which can be effective sometimes, but not usually, but depending on the environment. For example, the sports teams that have to change a large amount so that they are able to be competitive with other sports teams. We also have the rate of change, so the speed at which this change can occur. Either the change happening immediately or drawn out over a long period of time. And the desirability of change, whether or not the people in the system want to have this change happen. Because if this people do not want the change to happen, then it can cause some challenges within that system. Again, keeping in mind that that small people can cause big ripple effects through a system, especially a small group system. In some instances, the dismantling of an ineffective system may be necessary to replace it with a better system. With group projects, this is far more challenging. But sports teams perhaps are less are more prone to this dismantling. Next, we talk to dealing with difficult group members, aka bad apple spoilage. As I said before, one person in a system can cause wide ripple effects, wide impacts. A bad apple is a disruptive member who spoils the group. No matter this is a quote directly from the textbook. No matter how talented team members were in a study, those groups that had to deal with one bad apple tended to score 30 to 40% lower on challenging tasks than teams with no bad apple. This is something to consider, not so that we could just throw out the bad apple and try to socially ostracize the bad apple, but to understand that if a bad apple is allowed to continue to exist, then these are the negative impacts that we will receive. So how do we deal with these bad apples? First, by making certain the group is cooperative. It may seem cooperative, but you have to be sure that everyone is working together. Also, that the group member should establish a clear code of conduct for all group members. That there are specific norms and behaviors and roles that the group has to follow, otherwise there are consequences, or they are at least going to be confronted with this. This is incredibly important, because if there are not these norms or rules, then how does the bad apple know that they are indeed the bad apple without these guardrails letting them know that they are not doing the right thing? Some of these may seem, what is the word, common sense, but again, as we said, common sense is subject to hindsight bias. It may be common sense because we have had experiences with it. However, other people might not have. Also, changing your communication in relation to a difficult person's behavior. What is the definition of insanity? Doing the same thing over and over again and expecting a different result. If there is a difficult person, you cannot continue communicating with them the same way that you have been. By changing your communication, that is far more effective. Not to mention that one person approaching the bad apple, that's one thing. But the whole group coming together to address the bad apple, that is something very different. And that is changing your communication to deal with a bad apple. Fourth, to confront the difficult person. And this is probably the most challenging part. That when someone is being difficult, it is sometimes vulnerable to approach this situation and let them know, hey, this is a problem. However, that being said, what is the alternative? To have that 30% to 40% lower percentage on grades? Obviously, that is not an option. So we have to confront the person in groups. And this is not, again, to attack the other person. It is to make sure that they are a good member of the group as well as everyone else in the group. Not to mention, think of it like someone who smells bad. What are you going to do? Are you going to just not deal with the person? That may be fine if they aren't part of your group. But if they are and you are stuck with them, then it may be a good idea to let them know so that they are not making the same mistakes over and over again. Also, so it is an act of kindness, not an act of punishment. Also, and then eventually, if all else fails, separating yourself from the difficult person may be the last step. Next, with systems, we have boundary control. We have this involves openness and closedness of a system. Openness is the degree of continuous interchange with the outside environment. Adaptability to change is adjusting of group boundaries in response to changing environmental conditions. For example, if the environment is changing a lot, then we have to be more open and allow more input of information into this organization, into this system. However, if things are not as changing, then being more closed could potentially be the best option. Boundaries regulate input and consequent exposure to change in the system. Think about your friend groups. Are they open or closed to people? Some may be open, but what happens when that new person is someone who maybe just doesn't mesh well with the group? That is the point of boundary control, that we do not want to be changed by every single thing out there, and instead only things that will help the system, help the group. Boundaries, however, are permeable, meaning that things will always be able to come in. Even places like North Korea, which has a very closed boundary of information and physical, but there is a large industry, a large black market industry for American media, as well as food and products from more Western areas, as well as information coming from South Korea for people who are into North Korea, as well as information that is coming outside of going outside of North Korea from within. So, communicating methods of boundary control are important, and there are many boundaries that we do erect. First, physical barriers, protecting the group space. This is why we have houses. This is also why we have group meeting rooms. By having these physical boundaries, no people can just walk in and out and affect the group. But even if people were able to walk in, there's many other types. There's psychological barriers. They are members in name only, meaning that if we are part of the, let's say, Oakland Raiders organization, that is members in name only. And what happens when one of my team members gets moved to the Kansas City Chiefs? At that point, they are no longer part of the group just because they do not have the name on them anymore. We also have linguistic barriers, having to speak the language. And if you do not speak the language, then you are diverged from. You are not allowed into the group. A good example of this is slang. Spill the tea, my lit homie. That obviously, due to the linguistic barrier, I cannot speak the language because I do not know the language as well as most, but also because I am old. And as a result, I am unable to speak this due to the linguistic barrier. We also have rules, permission not being granted. Think back, if anyone's ever seen Mean Girls, they say you cannot sit with us. AKA, permission is not granted that you join this group. So there are particular rules in these situations. In the same way, I am sorry to say, am not going to be able to ever join a sorority. I know, I'm sad about it too. Frankly, because the rule states that I am a guy and sororities are for ladies, usually. Well, yeah, I think always. So permission is not granted and that barrier is erected. But that is not to say that that's a bad thing, because there should be some groups that if guys were allowed into these sorts of sororities, then it could potentially change the organization. However, that being said, there are some permeations, or there should be some ability to permeate within these groups. For example, the Boy Scouts have been uh, throughout time trying to maintain the boy part of Boy Scout, but due to the fact that a lot of their activities are not found within other groups, then girls have been um, able to be added into the Boy Scouts of America in some ways. So it is a little bit complex, but so too is communication and groups. Roles are also important, staying in bounds. A role is a pattern of expected behavior associated with parts we play in groups. For example, if I am part of the honors or the intellectual group, and then I do not get the type of grades that I should, I am no longer a part of that group. In the same way, if I am part of the goth or emo group, then and I am not acting in that way, then I may be eventually inevitably removed from that group. So these are all different types of groups, and they create our networks. They control interaction and flow from outside to within and from within to outside of the group. Open networks encourage change and potential disruption. There are some friend groups that allow anyone to come in. Please come in. Versus closed groups, which are more focused on keeping to ourselves, emphasizing stability, privacy, and permanence. Once you are in my friend group, you are going to stay in the friend group unless things go horribly wrong. So these networks definitely are something to understand with all of these groups, and how they adapt from the to the outside world, to what they take in from the outside world and what they give to the outside world, but also then yeah. Now so with open and closed systems, we have to be sure that we are setting effective boundaries. How do we do it? We have to keep in mind that no group can long endure unless it closes off to some outside influences and restricts access to some information. Because if there are not boundaries, at that point it may not hold the same identity as it has. For example, if I were to, for example, your friend group, what if your little cousin who is maybe let's say 5 or 6 years old wants to join? At that point, it would be challenging. If anyone can join a group, at that point, that also can be challenging. A group, however, must also close off when both quality and type of input place undue stress on the group and or prevent it from accomplishing its tasks. Also, group members should watch for signs of excessive openness or closeness, such as when groups experience debilitating stress and tension, divisive conflicts, boredom, malaise, or poor productivity. All of these are signs of excessive openness and closeness and affect the system, and if not addressed, will make the system entropy or break apart. And lastly, we move to the influence of size. Size of a group affects a great deal. In regards especially to complexity. When a group size increases numerically, complexity increases as well. Put it this way, if I have 3 people in my group, then I have to keep in mind what this person and this person's interaction, but also what this person and this person's interaction is, but also what these two's interaction with this person and these two's interactions with this person and these two interactions with this person. So there is automatically a lot of quantitative complexity just due to the fact that there's more people. Complexity and group transactions size matters as well, because our interactions are going to have to adapt based off of the size. In fact, if there are 3 people, a leader may not be necessary or may not be as necessary as a group of 10, where a leader almost certainly would have to be necessary for anything to function, for the system to function. So variations in size affect these group transactions. Larger groups typically have more non-participants than smaller groups. People feel like they can skate by in these situations and allows for more social loafing, which is not putting as much effort in as if you would be working on your own. Also, smaller groups also inhibit overt disagreement. That if we are in a small group, I am less likely to disagree with the group because I do not want to rock the boat. However, if it is a larger group, let's say a group of 10, then I may share my disagreement because there may be others who also agree with me. Group members tend to be less satisfied in groups of 10 or more. Large groups can lead to diminished productivity through decreased participation because, of social loafing, inhibition of overt disagreement, that people do not want to disagree more, although that's more common in smaller groups. Also, diminished levels of cooperation. That in larger groups we may be less likely to cooperate and instead try to form coalitions of, we all believe this, so let's do this. And reduce levels of satisfaction. If someone feels like they are automatically going to be overruled by a larger group, that can lead to diminished levels of satisfaction as well. So, how large should groups be? General rule of thumb, 7. That's where a lot of scholarship tends to lead. In fact, there's some scholarship to state that every person added after 7 decreases productivity by about 10%. Too many people in a group can lead to something called decision paralysis, where we are unable to make decisions based off of because the group is too large. Think to a large family vacation. Some people want to do this, some people want to do this, some people want to do this, some people want to do that. And therefore, there's this sort of decision paralysis. Well, now we don't know what to do. And some people have to be more accommodating and just go with the flow. Or what could happen in those situations is that some people want to go on a hike, some people want to go golfing. You know what? Let's just form into two different groups and do our own things. The best size for a group overall, though, is the smallest size capable of performing the task effectively. So trying to shoot for smaller groups tends to be the best way of going about it. Contextual factors, politics, legal requirements, institutional norms, availability of members, task complexity, etc., may necessitate groups larger in size than what works for the greatest efficiency. Guess what? No matter how inefficient Congress is going to be, there is a set number there, and that is not going to change, at least anytime soon. Now that we've talked about the elements of groups or systems, now we are going to be talking about an organization. An organization is a group of groups. Put it in the context of a business. Let's say a car company. That is an organization. With increasing group size comes greater formality. In this organization, you have to be fairly formal because it is a company. It is a business. The flow of information is one of the most important differences between small groups and complex organizations. In a car company, where does the information originate from and where does it go to? Usually from the top all the way down to the bottom. Or from the top to like an outside media company to the media, and then everyone hears about it from the media. This is actually the flow of information at Disneyland, or at least as a cast member. And information distortion usually is a bigger problem in organizations than in small groups. It becomes a game of telephone, because if one group is communicating to another group, then another group is communicating to another group, and another group is communicating to another group, that is a challenge. And that is why there are some networks in play, or that could be in place, that try to avoid this, where maybe everyone communicates to one group, then one group communicates it back relevant information to all the other groups. So an organization is a group of groups. And that concludes this chapter. Have a great rest of your day, and I'll see you next time.